Great. Okay, I see we are now live and it looks like we have people trickling in. Hi, everyone. Want to make sure everyone can see our screen and hear us. Great. We'll just give everyone a couple of seconds to join. And as you are entering the Zoom, feel free to drop a chat and let us know where you're tuning in from and what you're excited to learn about today. I think this is a topic that we are super, super excited about. It's something that we've been waiting for a long time, and we're excited to have Carly here to chat about all things AR and VR. Hello, we've got people in Denmark. I'm currently in Louisiana in the United States. Virginia, great. Barcelona, incredible. Awesome. So we will kick things off with some housekeeping. So just so everyone is aware, yes, this is being recorded, so no worries if you have to jump off or want to watch again later. We will send a recap. You can drop any questions as Carly goes through her presentation in the chat or Q&A. We'll check both. And we'll make sure that we have time for questions at the end. And then we also have an interactive Q&A section too. So we'll be keeping an eye on the chat there. We will again send you guys the video after. So stay tuned for that YouTube link and we will send you an email. So just want to see who we've got so far. Seattle, incredible. Palm Springs, hello. Lancaster, UK. And just a reminder, as you guys are tuning in, just feel free to drop any questions you might have or things you're interested to learn, and we'll make sure we get to it at the end. Awesome. Great. All right, and with that, I think we are ready to introduce Carly.
Awesome. So thanks so much, Katie. So I'm really excited to be here today and talk with you about content design and everything that's augmented reality and virtual reality and everything in between. So I'll just say a little bit about myself. I'm a senior UX writer, currently working in the financial services industry, but I'm a former UX writer and content strategist for North that was acquired by Google almost a year ago now. And North made Focal smart glasses, which were an AR smart glasses product. In this photo, actually, it might be hard to tell, but I am wearing Focal smart glasses. There's a tiny little projector on the right-hand lens that projects an AR projection that I can see. And I worked with a really fantastic UX design team at North because AR technology is very new. And because it's so new, the UX design really makes or breaks a successful AR product. So I learned a lot from the UX team and the product team at North and how writing and content design fits into that. So I really am excited to share some of the things I learned. Because this is such an emerging space, let's learn some of those best practices together. And like Katie said, at the end, we'll have an opportunity to practice. So let's get into what we're going to be talking about today specifically. So before we get into anything, we're going to just dip our toes into the space. So defining augmented reality, mixed reality, and virtual reality, and how those experiences manifest and where you can find them. Why we should even be talking about AR right now. So as content designers, how are we going to be able to prepare to write for AR and VR experiences? And I really want to talk about some of the challenges that as a content professional I've had trying to fit text into such a new type of product. So I'll share what I've learned, some of the goals of successful AR and VR design, and how we as writers can adapt to write for that. And I'm really excited to present some case studies to practice. They're just really short writing prompts, nothing serious, but great to get sort of exposure to it and write together and get some feedback. So, and we'll wrap up with questions. All right, let's get into it. What is AR, VR, and MR? So this spectrum of the reality experiences gets more immersive as you go, but so we'll start with augmented reality and defining that. So augmented reality is imagining what's not there or enhancing something that you already see. So you think about like Snapchat filters or Instagram filters, those are enhancing sort of your own beauty, so to say. So it's just enhancing what's already there. But we get a layer deeper in this next step with mixed reality. So mixed reality is seeing what's not there, but being able to be interactive with it, maybe rotating something, manipulating it in some way. So there's more interaction. And with virtual reality, this is the top tier of that immersion experience where you have a full imagining of a new experience. So you're co-authoring a story, you're in a completely brand new world. And here is just some examples that illustrate that. I'm sure we're all familiar with some of the AR shopping apps that exist today. So this sample's from IKEA, where you're placing some furniture in a room. It's pretty obvious that the furniture is not there, but it helps you gauge and see if that matches your aesthetic. This next example is from Microsoft for HoloLens. And here with this example, you can see that they are interacting with some sort of retail display, seeing how it'll look in a storefront. And it really helps you just engage more with something that's not there. And then virtual reality. So fully immersive, the possibilities are endless. Mostly found in gaming, but it could have other applications like for virtual work. So why should we even talk about this as content designers or UX writers? And we're seeing AR and VR products now become more accessible and valuable in their everyday use cases. So in this chart, you'll see that earlier renditions are very tech heavy. These look like giant helmets. You wouldn't want to wear them everywhere. And they're very limited in the scope of their use. So it's for specialized work or gaming setups. But as you get through the timeline, you can see that they're getting lighter. They're melding into more products that you use in their everyday life, like cars. So it's no longer this heavy helmet type of cyborg technology. It's lots of tiny tech packed into lighter form factors that you can wear every day, wear for fashion, or encounter every day in your car or your daily commute. And this is the evolution of computing. So we're seeing a lot more companies getting into the space and becoming competitive. So I love this quote from Tim Cook, Apple CEO, where he talks about augmented reality as like the smartphone. So there's no really set demographic. It really is for everyone, and the possibilities to improve your daily tasks is just endless. But at the same time, it can be entertaining. So we have all of these big players that are rumored to be in the space. Apple, I talked about the Google acquisition for North, so there's some speculation there of what they'll do with their smart glasses products. So there's a lot of potential to create more wearable experiences that everyone could have. So it's not just about filters, it's real consumer products that bring contextual computing to a heads-up display. And when it comes to contextual computing, what do we mean by that? So there are some powerful things you can do with AR, but contextual computing is about getting data or information from the things that you see in your world and being able to take action on those items. So in this example on the right, on the bottom, this is from a research project from Facebook called Project Aria, and it shows music recommendations as you walk into a record shop. And you're able to see the reviews, any price comparisons. You can see if that's already on your wish list. And this type of contextual computing and photo recognition, when we're all able to travel a bit more, will be insanely useful for when we're traveling abroad and translating menus and just being able to travel like a local without looking like a tourist. So a lot of opportunities for AR to simplify the tasks that otherwise need a lot of different devices or require a lot of your attention. And I talked a little bit briefly about specialized uses for AR, and there's a huge market for enterprise and employee training and virtual work. So the pandemic has sort of done a lot in people's lives, like to affect them. But I think this was for a good reason for AR and VR to sort of fill in the gap for some of those social distancing and physical distancing restrictions that businesses have experienced. So AR can sort of be that trusted colleague, train if those colleagues can't interact as often or as frequently as they need to. So there's a lot of opportunity there to build better workplace experiences. And we talk about AR and VR as head-mounted displays, and generally this means that they're not as accessible for visually impaired or blind users. But I think there is still a lot of potential to build more accessible experiences using smart glasses and heads-up display. So if you think about if a user is deaf and they could get that conversation transcribed across their glasses, that's something that's really powerful. Or if someone is blind and the glasses can alert them through audio if an obstacle is coming up, that again is something that is life-changing. So a lot of potential of the types of experiences in contextual computing. And I have an example that I'd like to share from HoloLens about one of that enterprise samples. So this is what looks like a safety procedure. So let's take a look at the clip. I think it does a great job of illustrating the power of augmented steps and animations. And let's look at the clip and talk about it.
Hey Carly, is there any audio on this clip or is it just visuals?
If there's no audio, it's just a bunch of orchestra music, so you're not missing a lot. It's very dramatic music. Awesome. Okay, so let's get back to the slides here. So you can see how useful something this is, not only for a training perspective, but for more efficient work. So at one point of this clip, there was a point where the employee takes a photo and then sends it to a safety log for record keeping or something. So any other task like this in another warehouse would maybe need pen and paper or a supervisor to sign off on it. So a manager to witness. Instead, HoloLens takes a photo and records it instantly. So there's less steps and it's a more streamlined process. And I do want to call out the amount of interaction that the text and the animations and the visuals had together. So I don't think that would have been as successful to helping that employee get the task that they needed to complete if the words, the design, the animations, the motion design weren't all working together cohesively. So this is how we as UX writers can really start thinking about the way that words can be smarter and work with the design, but not just the design, the motion and the aspects as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. That was such a great example. Someone in the comments said IKEA needs to start using this, and I totally agree. I think that would be super, super helpful. So
very good. It's funny that you mentioned IKEA because yeah, I wanted to make the comparison between how this is way better than IKEA instructions, like just having some sort of guidance that's not just a visual. So let's get into how we can write better and write smarter to design AR experiences. And the first step is to recognize some of the challenges of working in AR and VR, and to look at each specific AR and VR goal or design goal, and then apply that using UX writing principles or concepts. So these are things like immersion and presence. We mentioned that briefly earlier, how gestures and interactions play into things, the viewable canvas, so how AR and VR differ in the types of canvases that they use to display information. And then we'll wrap up with some storytelling and persona tips. All right, so what are the biggest challenges? And because this is such a new space, it comes with new challenges and presents opportunities to adapt our writing to it. And the first being application. So I know we've sort of bundled AR and VR together at the beginning, but the intent is actually very different from one another. So the intent of AR is mostly for quick hits of information. Like when we wrote for Focals, we had a saying, it should be there when you need it, but gone when you don't. But VR is a completely different immersive experience. You can have longer sessions. It's more closely linked to computers and gaming, so you can replicate what's on your desktop in a VR display. But for AR, again, it should be it's not meant to watch Netflix or stream things. It's very much just to get that contextual information when you need it. And second is education. And because it's a brand new space and these are new products with applications that have never been done before, people might need to see to believe. And we've talked a lot about the product content, or the content that's in the product. But a challenge that I had as a content strategist there was all of the content that's outside of the product and educating people about this new product. So how it works, it's not like buying a new phone where you already know what it's all about and what it does. It's up to us as content designers to show what the product does, because a lot of people don't know what AR and VR are meant to do or how it works. And with Focals, again, there was a tiny projector on the right lens, and we had a lot of challenges trying to describe to people how it would work, because it could sound scary. It technically was a class 1 laser product, and the laser would project on a holographic film and then onto your eye or your pupil or your field, and you could see the display in your field of view that way. So we had a big challenge trying to communicate. We don't want to say a laser is going in your eye, because that sounds terrifying. So trying to craft the story that is projecting onto your eye or in your line of sight, that is a lot more approachable. And when I say class 1 laser, that's a lot of your printers, CD players, if you still have them, those are class 1 laser products. So it's not anything crazy. But again, it's just all about that education about the product in the space. And all of that pre and post purchase content that can help set expectations, that is super important too. And content strategists, content designers, if you're especially the lone writer at an organization, you could be covering all of the content everywhere, not just in the product. So creating stuff that teaches people about the product and set that expectation, whether it's about privacy concerns. And it was a big when Google Glass first launched, because you had the term glass hole if you're touching and recording and you can see that people were surveilling you. We write with different assumptions with the customer in mind, but it's all about really trying to guide people into this space and make it more approachable, less scary. So let's get into our first goal, that is immersion and presence. and adapting your writing based off of that goal and into this application of AR and VR. And immersion is really about being completely there in that moment. It's not just for the full headset experiences like VR. With AR, you could be immersed in your commute to work, or you're walking along the street and just trying to get where you need to go. And if you get a notification, that could break your presence in that moment. So it's a different application depending on what product type you're writing for, but still really important to keep in mind. We shouldn't want, like, people should feel fully immersed in what they're doing, and we shouldn't break the presence with our content. So how do we do this is timing our messages really well. And a prompt like this on the right, this is from a VR case study, and it's very disruptive. It takes you out of the moment. The task isn't even fully complete. They've just put the fruit in the bowl, and they get a prompt like you see on a computer, and two very distinct actions, exit or continue. And something like this really will make you feel like, oh, I'm in a computer program. I'm not in a kitchen cleaning fruit. So be conscious of how you're timing things and how much information you're asking from your user at this point. And for AR specifically, you really do want to avoid lengthy paragraphs and scrolling, because like I said, the application is very different. You don't want people to be scrolling endlessly on AR. It's meant to be contextual and useful. And also be conscious on how much content displays. If you have a lot of different messages that can be chunked in other places, like this message here, maybe you could have an exit button on the left and then a continue button on the right, just so it's not all in one place and really disruptive. All right, and viewable canvas. So Canvas will depend on whether you're writing for an AR product or a VR product. And when we think about Canvas, like for mobile or desktop experiences, those typically have set dimensions that we know are always true. But for VR, that could be the full 360-degree area around you. For focals, we actually worked on an intensely tiny display. It was 30 pixels by 30 pixels. And that projected into your line of sight at a rate that was like maybe 300 pixels by 300 pixels, but still a really, really small display.
Yeah, wow.
So yeah, it's very, very tiny. The UI is really an overlay of the world that you see behind you. So with AR, knowing that you have less space, less is definitely more when it comes to writing. You don't want information that distracts or obscures the field of view. For the navigation example, people could be rushing to get to an appointment and you don't want them to run into obstacles. So that means less tooltips and microcopy and messages that are timed super well, like in the Immersion and Presence example. For focals, again, we wanted information that was there when you needed it and gone when you don't. So we really tried to position the text strategically, usually in the bottom left, so you can quickly glance at it and then look away. But with VR, you have more space to work with. And this, again, so this example on the right, both from Oculus, more panels, you can see you have more panels, more UI, more info. The goal should be to see everything in front of you. You shouldn't have to look behind you to see important actions. So the more you're using text, keeping that less is more mentality still, especially in this menu on the bottom where you can see on hover, they've actually said to display the text. So that is great when you're working with the iconography, but then also strategically having the text display so you're not seeing every option displayed at once. And then what's unique for AR and VR is that they are multimodal by default. So they are using different interaction types in addition to experiences that are very heavily visual. And with the design goals for gestures and interaction, we want this to feel very natural. And this contributes to that presence aspect. So when the gestures feel more natural, you're more pulled into the experience, and you're more engaged. So this can include things like voice commands, hand gestures, where you're looking, your gaze, and even controllers. So at Focals, we had interaction device called Loop, which is the top screenshot here. It was a ring you would wear on your finger. And then it had a small directional pad where you could swipe through the experiences there. And what we as writers, because these are such high stakes actions, and we need to be super accurate and familiar in the way that we describe them. So instead of calling, like in this bottom screenshot or animation where you're spreading your fingers to reroute, you wouldn't want to call this like a blip or a blop. Like that, just make it super natural and related to the actual action that the user needs to perform. So spread fingers, that is a great way to describe that action. And because this is such a multimodal area, you need to be mindful of the common areas that result from the environment. So things like loud cafes, if you're in a loud cafe and your product relies on voice commands, make sure you're being forward thinking in your messaging to create content that helps users course correct. So whether that's creating a message that helps them move to a quieter area, or for Focals, we had a sizing app that we had one error that said the area was too bright and you had to move to a darker area. Or maybe for the loop sizing, we said, use a dark surface so we can capture the area more efficiently, things like that. So generic error messages need not apply. Make sure you as content designers are helping users get to the right area. All right, so storytelling and personas. And when we talk about personas, this is something very common in the UX community. A lot of people are already familiar with these concepts, but with AR and VR, sometimes this is even magnified because the user is literally the main character in that experience. And for augmented reality, sometimes this is just people's lives that you're trying to help them through. So they need to feel in control of the narrative and co-author the story at all times. And there are those unique, like specialized use cases for smart glasses, like in this example for surgeons. So keep the messaging and super focused and on task because this is such high stakes. So imagine you wouldn't want distractions, no text messages, no tips. If a new feature just launched and their glasses updated, that person in that operating room is not going to want to see that type of information. So be respectful of their time and the intensity of the task or their profession. And again, so at North, we really had the mantra that our smart glasses are not meant to be a notifications hub. So there was no ability to read like large email threads or Twitter threads. And it's again, just meant to be super focused to what you're doing and on task. And understanding your persona and their reservations about AR and VR. Not everyone is as comfortable working with AR products as maybe we as designers are. So making sure we're being super diligent with recognizing that, and maybe that translates to our product persona or product voice rather. So creating a voice that's more guiding and inviting, because these things can be scary and a little too futuristic for some people, but also knowing when to bring in some of those more specialized voices and jargon, because this can be applied to such specialized roles. Yeah, so we don't want to be saying or explaining what low O2 levels means to a surgeon if they already know what that means.
Awesome.
All right, so let's practice. Let's put some of the things we just learned into practice. And so this first writing prompt I have is for an onboarding step. And imagine if you're writing for an AR furniture app. And the first step to getting the furniture to show in your living room is to show the area to your smartphone using the camera. So use the UI image or the action image on the left as your reference of what you want the user to do. And then what you would write or suggest to the designer or motion designer to complement the UI image on the right. And so I think we're going to be using the chat to get some responses, hopefully.
Awesome.
I see scan the area with your camera. Great.
Scan the floor. Arrows versus words. Interesting.
Use your camera to scan the room. Awesome. Scan the floor in a circular motion. These are all great. Yeah, and I can share some of the options that I came up with, which are all really spot on to what everyone else was really suggesting here. So scan the area, which a bunch of people use that verb scan. Capture the room. This is kind of a wild card where capture is a little more niche, I would say, of a verb, but I think it still works. And then use your phone to scan the room, or a lot of you said use your camera, which is great. And I think someone said about the arrows and maybe complementing some of the visuals. So that's really important. You want to make sure that any text that you recommend works with any animation or UI that's going to be displaying also. All right, and this next writing prompt is an error message. I don't think I could do a case study without having an error message in. I think they're so fun to write. And this example of what the current error message is the biggest reason why I think we as content designers exist, to make sure that messages like this don't happen. So the scenario here is you're writing for a smart glasses product that has a voice assistant built in. And this authorization failed message displays in both of these scenarios, whenever your glasses disconnect from Bluetooth and when the voice assistant can't interpret your request. So what would you recommend to the product team or to your designer, what types of messages to write for this?
Let's see those error messages.
And the question, they have to address both. You don't need one message to address both. You can maybe suggest two messages. There was an issue with the microphone. Check your settings like that. Check your Bluetooth connection. Awesome. Can you repeat that? I like the conversational tone. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I think everyone's on the right track here. I suggested some of it for this prompt specifically to have two unique messages, remembering that you want to keep the messages very, very contextual, because you don't want someone who's maybe riding a bike and encounters this message to have to like stop, get off their bike and look up the error. So for the smart glasses or Bluetooth connection issue, I have lost connection and then reconnect through the app, assuming that you have a companion app, just giving them a step to try and resolve the issue. And then for the voice assistant, sorry, I couldn't catch that. And because I'm a Canadian, I couldn't resist saying sorry. But a lot of you said, please repeat that or say that again. So yeah, amazing. And then tap to try again, just to give them an option to course correct there.
Amazing.
Right. Amazing participation. And I think we have some questions that people submitted ahead of time that I have some answers for. So the first question a lot of you wanted to know is how to get into UX writing for AR and VR. And other than staying connected to some of those career pages for the companies I mentioned earlier, I'll tell you the story about how I got started. It was kind of by accident, but when North was hiring for content strategists, they were a wearable product company. They made an armband that let you interact with software with your arm gestures and wrist gestures. So I was expecting to work on a product like that, but because the space is so competitive, you'll get a lot of these wearable companies working in the background on AR technology. And then it was my first day at North where I found out they were pivoting from wristband technology to smart glasses. So that's just a tip from me, is just to keep your eyes peeled on some of the smaller companies that are working on these things, and see what opportunities exist there. And also keep an eye on the automotive industry. And I talked about it a bit earlier, but some of these more luxury brands and vehicles are bringing more tech into your dash. So that brings a lot of opportunity for us as UX writers to step into that space and write the content that you would see on the road. And another question that I think is probably deserving of its own webinar is, how can we make AR and VR more accessible and inclusive? And considering inclusive design is all about considering diversity with respect to age, ability, gender, culture, language. And so for a product that is typically not super inclusive from a sizing perspective, what I think we can do as content designers is test everything. So test with a variety of users with different backgrounds, and then be the voice of those people and bring that feedback to your product teams. One thing we can do immediately is make sure we're using plain language whenever possible, or where it makes sense. Like, remember your persona in this case. So it wouldn't make sense to communicate what O2 levels are to a surgeon. But the Conscious Style Guide is a great resource for getting more information on writing more inclusively. But again, yeah, I think this is a great question, and something that the space really needs to learn more from. Awesome. I think we'll go to the chat if there are some questions now.
Yeah, Carly, Patrick and I have been rounding up some of the questions, so we can start with these. And then if you guys have any other thoughts, please drop them in the chat. So someone was wondering if you could expand more on the gestures session, and if like spread fingers is a widely used gesture, and how that came to be, similar to how on mobile we say tap or touch briefly, etc. So just
let me just go back to that slide so we know what we're looking at. So this is actually a sort of like from North, when they used to make wristband devices. This is called the Myo armband, and it had a Google Glass integration where you could control what you see on Google Glass using your wrist. So I'd say it's not as common in the space nowadays, but I know I would highly encourage, if you're more interested in gestures and interaction, to check out Facebook Reality Labs and their recent keynote this year. So they talked a lot about more natural interactions using wrist and arm movements. But in terms of the language, this is pretty accurate to what the action is all about. And I don't know if there would be another way that you would suggest saying it, but I'd be super open to learning more about that, or if there were other questions about this section.
Great. Yeah, if anyone has any other questions on gestures, feel free to drop them in the chat. But until then, the next question. So how do you balance immersion in AR without becoming so absorbed it turns into a liability for the user? I'm trying to make sure I understand that question correctly. Without becoming so absorbed it turns into a liability for the user. So essentially, creating an immersive experience without turning into a liability.
Right. And I think that that comes down to the product direction. And I'll speak for Focals. When I was there, we didn't want people to be so tethered to their technology that they were super dependent about it. We really saw AR as an opportunity to have a better relationship with your technology. So we would design experiences that would help you feel more present in your real life and get you away from the dangers of just being too absorbed in the digital world. So we would design things like conversation detection. So if you and I were having a conversation, I wouldn't get notifications coming across my display. Little things like that just are really thoughtful, but help you feel a bit more connected to the real life while still giving you the peace of mind that you have access to that information if you need it.
Great. All right, so next question, this one's an interesting one. So for someone who loves to work directly in the UI UX mocks, what drafting or mockup tools do you use?
Right, so that's the the challenge is getting writers in the design tool, right? So at North we use Sketch, and I was lucky to have access to the design file and work with the designers really closely on the language. Towards the end, we were moving to Figma, but yeah, I think it comes down to understanding what tools your organization is using and how collaborative they are. Like Sketch is, I at least the way we were using it at North was not as collaborative as something like Figma, where I could leave comments and tag people and say, what do you think about this? But yeah, I'd say we use Sketch there, but Figma was really great for collaborating across for a content perspective.
Great. I'm just taking a look at the rest of our questions to see if we have any other ones. We kind of already touched on accessibility, readers, and tools. Somebody had asked, have you ever worn a HoloLens?
Have I ever worn a HoloLens?
Yeah.
Once before. We had some competitor devices at North when we could all go in the office. But yeah, I didn't wear it for longer than a couple minutes. It was really bulky. And yeah, I don't think a lot of those like wraparound headsets are very nice to wear for a really long time, but definitely great for if you're just working and need some quick information.
Yep. Great. And so another question, how do you account for translation and localization in terms of length of words, phrases, direction of text when thinking about just like the spatial content designing?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question, and something that if North continued on the product roadmap with Focals, something we need to address, because Focals was only available in English, so it definitely we didn't have that challenge when we first launched. But I can imagine languages like French, German that have longer text strings, and working on a display that had maybe 30 pixels, that truncation of text would be very tricky to work with. And at what point do we say this is helpful enough before the text trails off, or how do we say when we click it, maybe you reveal the rest of the text? So I think it'll come down to, for AR, if you're writing for a smaller AR device, working really closely with your localization and translation partners, making sure that what you're suggesting, if you're writing in English, will translate to other languages, and seeing where you can shorten things whenever possible. But definitely, I think there's going to need to be some more creative solutions, like whether it's a marquee maybe. So if the text trails off and you hover over it, then the rest slowly pans across your screen. But definitely a great question, but something we didn't have to deal with at North when we first launched Focals.
Got it. Great. We're getting some more good questions. So the next one, this is a fun one. How much does legal get involved in the design process? Just knowing the different liabilities here.
Yeah, and I think again, like we had for the translation question, having a really close relationship with your legal partners is super important. At Focals, we were lucky to have a dog fooding program, so that's sort of like an internal beta. So all of our legal team had Focals as well, and they were part of that, like testing and feedback and helping us understand what we can and can't build and what is best from a privacy standpoint. So they were actually really involved in the design process early on. And then from a content perspective, I worked really closely with the legal team there to really be transparent in some of those out of product content experiences. So what does our privacy policy look like? How can we say things in the most transparent way, but still being accurate and helpful? So yeah, I think if you are writing for an AR product or a smart glasses product, make sure you're looping in your legal partners early.
Great, that's good advice all around. And Shannon has a question. So what are you personally most excited about with AR VR developments now? What can we look forward to?
Yeah, and I think what I'm personally super excited about is all of those accessibility features that I mentioned previously. So like I said, headsets or smart glasses are usually not the most accessible product by design. And so how can we create experiences that not only help people with disabilities, but make our product easier to use by everyone? So I think things like speech to text are really, really powerful things. And even from an audio perspective, like if you're in a loud place, could you mute that audio and just get more focus? So I think the sound aspect, but also the accessibility features that we can build that are powered by AR are the most exciting to me.
Carly, I have a question. You talked about this a little bit at the beginning, where you sort of outlined how some major players in tech are looking at AR and VR, and they think it's a really important development. As content designers, how important is it that you think we understand how to write for this medium right now? Because I think sometimes people have a hard time thinking, oh, is this going to be a fad? So do I really spend my time working on this? Or do I go all in and make sure that I'm really on top of everything? What would you just suggest to people who are sort of on the fence about that?
Yeah, I would say just look at the projection and like this last year. So a lot of this Apple leak, this image that I have from Apple smart glasses speculated product, all of these things are happening right now. So these products are in the works or rumored or already in development. So I think there's not it's not going to fade out. There's all of the sources are pointing to that this is in the market, and because the technology is getting smaller and lighter, and we can wear these every day, that we do need to start thinking about these now, and not even from just like a wearable perspective, but like we said with the vehicles, I think a lot of people, if you're purchasing a new vehicle, that technology is really important. So making sure that we're as UX writers prepared to write for experiences that are pretty high stakes, like driving and safety. Like we need to make sure our words don't get in the way of that. And I think all of the sources are just pointing towards like this is like the renaissance of AR and VR, and I think we're ready for it.
Yeah. Ellen had said, I've been reading about audio AR, a large installed base of devices. Interesting to consider what that would be like. I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah, so something we've talked a lot about VR and AR and like a visual aspect, but virtual reality, if we go by the definition that it can be immersive in any type of new world, that can include audio. So there is an audio only app that I use for running that's called Zombies Run, and it makes you feel like you're running away from zombies and you're in a zombie apocalypse. And so it's just amazing what audio itself, if I'm just running down, you know, these suburban side streets, but I still feel like I'm in this intense situation. So, and that's all storytelling and writing. That's, you know, if you come from a playwriting background or a script writing background, this story helps drive, and dialogue design helps drive that.
I'm going to download that app right now. I need to run. That's great. Awesome. All right, I'm trying to see if we have any other questions. Somebody had said, what do you think that the metaverse will be a thing? I personally don't know what the metaverse is, so maybe I can learn as well. Do we think we will reach that reality?
And I'm not sure, like a fictional like a virtual, if I'm remembering some literature I read, it's like a virtual shared environment.
Yep, a collective virtual shared space. Yep.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. And because of the pandemic, like I know one of my good friends of mine has had her second pandemic birthday where she can't celebrate with other people. So this opens up an opportunity for VR to create a shared space where maybe our holograms or virtual avatars can get together and hang out and have a celebration. So maybe that's what this is getting to, is like a shared space, but we can all gather virtually there. And I think if you again watch that Facebook Reality Labs keynote, they do talk a lot about the social potential of VR. And yeah, I think it's just really interesting in the time that we are now to think about that possibility, and how we can create social spaces, but in virtual worlds that aren't through Zoom or through video conference.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was saying earlier, I think we're all zoomed out. We need our next medium, our next channel. Great. Yeah, no, exciting stuff. Let's see. Okay, we have a couple more questions coming in. Can the user configure these devices, for example, with preferred gestures? Would that complicate writing for the experience?
Oh, that is a good question. I think giving the user the flexibility to customize their controls to whatever feels natural to them will help enhance that concept of immersion in that experience. So, and yeah, again, I think it's something to address at the product level. I know for Focals, we didn't have a ton of customization when it came to the inputs, because we just had 4 directions that you could go, and the click was how you could interact with things. So I don't know if that would complicate things for the experience, but I think for the user that would have a really high impact and great value for them.
Great. Also, sorry, the train is going by, so you might hear some noises. But I just wanted to say that we are quickly running out of time. So I just wanted to thank Carly really quickly before we jump off. And Carly is an incredible instructor with UX Writers Collective. So obviously, if you have any questions or want to learn more, definitely reach out and we'll put you in touch. And then somebody had asked about resources for learning more. And so we'll send a follow-up email, and in that we'll include some links and things that will be helpful for you. So definitely more to come there.
Katie, I just want to, sorry to interrupt. I just want to ask one last question, because someone did just drop one in that I think would be good to answer. How can content designers build their AR and VR portfolio on the side? Because this is such a new area and there aren't a lot of opportunities to work on this within people's existing roles. How can they even get started with something like this? Do they sort of make up an app on their own? Do they take an existing app? Or maybe do they take something that exists on a smartphone and say, okay, how would this work in an AR context? How can they go about that?
Yeah, I think all great options. I know for me as a writer, I had to step out of my comfort zone in a lot of ways, because the display on Focals is not something you could like take a screenshot of. It wasn't that simple. So every single screenshot that we had in our knowledge base, I had to make from scratch using Sketch or another design tool. So if you're looking to build your AR portfolio, I would say you can create your own AR filters and learn from that, and see how text could interact in that experience. Or like Patrick said, maybe come up with a concept and then using something like Figma, or if you want to incorporate some motion design, try and teach yourself some quick animations using After Effects. Or I used InVision Studio a lot because it had really user-friendly and beginner-friendly animation tools. And then you can create some engaging screens and write text for that and see how different animations can affect the messaging in the story. So all great options, I think, but practicing if you can by just coming up with a concept, or working with an app that already uses VR and then seeing how you can make that better, that can help you build your portfolio.
Yeah, Carly, because I'm thinking as someone, you're very experienced in this area, and if you were looking for someone to hire, I can assume that maybe it would be less important to you about whether what they're showing you has actually been released, and more about what their thinking process was and how they went about everything you've just
Exactly. Like,
described in
what
this
was your
webinar.
thought process? How did you draft this? What was your vision for how this would interact with the visuals on the screen and the animation? So, all great ways to just show your thinking through a portfolio, and then bonus points, you get to say that you know how to do some motion design.
Amazing.
Great, thank you.
Carly, thank you so much.
No problem.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. We will send you this in an email recap, and we'll follow up with some resources and other links and things to read more. But until then, thanks everyone. Awesome. All right. Thanks, Carly. Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks.
Bye.